Okay, everybody. That's what I was waiting for, that musical jingle. It makes me feel so important. Welcome back. I hope everybody had a really good break and time to visit the global village, as well as replenish your sugar stocks. Anyway, moving on. Just quickly to remind everybody that, there's a conversation happening on social media. Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram are the places to be if you're a social media type. Using hashtag EDD22, hashtag Global Gateway, and hashtag EDD Young Leaders. There we are. So, on with the next session, which is about the Global Gateway. I'm just asking myself things like, how robust is this gateway, and how can citizens be protected against malevolent state and non-state actors? What type of education is necessary to equip citizens to be vigilant and to protect their own privacy, for example? How can the EU provide protection from viruses and all the other nasty things that are out there and that sometimes get in the way of our digital participation and inclusion? Well, I would like to invite to the stage now Andrea Renda, Senior Research Fellow and Head of GRID, Centre for European Policy Studies. Take it away, please.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay, good afternoon, everybody. So we are going to start the session. I introduce briefly myself, then I will call on stage the two speakers we have here in presence, and then I will also mention the two that will intervene remotely connected. My name is Andrea Renda. I'm a Senior Research Fellow at the Centre for European Policy Studies in Brussels, here in Brussels, and a Professor of Digital Policy at the European University Institute, the School of Transnational Governance in Florence. And I'm happy, very honored to moderate this session. I will take a seat. Before I introduce you, the speakers, you see the speakers have so much content to provide to you that I'd rather give you the instructions on how to interact with them right now, even before they jump on stage. So I will ask whether the Slido image can be put on screen right now, so that you have the information for interacting with the speakers. So whenever you're ready with the Slido, you have to go to slido.com. Well, that was a good one, but I don't see it. Oh, now I see it on screen. You should be seeing it on the screen as well. You use the code #EDD22. You choose your room. Please don't ask questions to another room, because they might not understand why you're asking those questions. So please pick the room on Global Gateway, the EU's contribution to an open and secure internet, and then pose your questions. You will see there's a possibility to enter a poll or questions, but there's no poll in this session. There's only Q&A. So we will see which questions come in from people connected online, people here in the audience, and we'll select some questions for our speakers, or even better, we'll let them also look a little bit at the screen and see which questions they feel most comfortable answering. So I'm going to take a seat and call on stage first Helen Edwards, Director General of International Development Cooperation at the Swedish Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Helen, your pick, you're the first comer, so you pick whether you want to be in the center or not. And then I will also call our other speaker in presence, Emmanuel Gans, young leader that will guide us through some of the issues related to the open and secure internet, and in particular freedom of speech in countries like Benin, but also more generally in Africa. Okay, so we will have also, with these two distinguished speakers, we will have two speakers connected online. The first one is Mamadou Bité, Executive Secretary of the African Capacity Building Foundation, and the second is Ambassador Lotte Knudsen, who's the ambassador and head of the EU delegation at the United Nations. So, open and secure internet. Well, as far as I know, since I've been an academic in this field for a long time, the internet was supposed to be open since the very beginning, and many people still call it open whenever there is a possibility for anyone to connect and receive and send any type of content. Whether it's secure or not, well, this is something that we might want to discuss. I remember already in the 1990s, a famous academic from New York University, Carol Rose, used to call the internet and wrote an article calling the internet Central Park After Dark, meaning a place where you could find, especially during those years, a lot of excitement, a lot of interesting things, an abundance of content, but at the same time, risk, and at the same time, potential challenges and potential danger, right? Well, 3 decades down the road, the situation is perhaps a little bit different, and we see the internet increasingly threatened by attempts to control speech, difficulties in algorithmic control of speech at the same time, and we also see problems related to the access to people's private lives in many, many different ways, and the possibility that people's action on the internet might have repercussions on their freedom when they also live their offline existence. So, can the global gateway become a way for the EU not only to invest in infrastructure, because this is essentially an infrastructure project, but can it also be a type of investment that brings with it principles and values of an open and secure internet? And what does this mean? Can the EU really bring these values? How would this work? How is this going to work in practice? This is what these are among the things that we want to discuss in this hour of panel. Before I give the floor to our first speaker, I would actually want to mention that part of this panel also features the presence of a high-level political figure from Africa, the Zambian Minister of Foreign Affairs, who, coming all the way from Zambia, has experienced one thing that you would never expect, that traffic jams in Brussels can be much worse than what you can find in Africa. So he's stuck somewhere with his car. As soon as he comes, we will give him the possibility to address us. It should have been an inaugural speech for this session. It will not be, but as soon as he comes, we will give him the floor. So Helen, I am super happy that you're with us. And Sweden is traditionally considered as one of those countries people say that punch above their weight when it comes to development. You obtain and you advocate for things that are important, even beyond the actual economic weight, if you wish, and of your country. So a very important presence and a very vocal presence in the landscape of global development and global governance. I give you the floor, and I thank you very much for being with us. All the speakers will have 4 minutes at the beginning for their first speech, but I promise a second round, so we'll find a way for them to give them the floor again once we've collected some questions. Helen, I give you the floor, and thanks you for being with us.
Thank you so much, Andrea, and thank you for showing up for this very important session. I'm very pleased to be able to speak for a few minutes on an open and secure internet. Andrea, you have described the challenges that we are facing, the digitalization being an integral part of development, but not yet fully available, and surely not yet either fully secure. We know that the ability and willingness of state and non-state actors to pursue their objectives by undertaking malicious cyber activities is constantly increasing. And we are, on the part of Sweden, truly committed to upholding our common security order in cyberspace when norms are being breached, as we have agreed among UN member states to do. And the EU cyber diplomacy toolbox exists for that particular purpose, to counter malicious cyber activities against infrastructure, cyber espionage, intellectual property theft, cybercrime, and disinformation using cyber means. The EU is also increasingly establishing itself as a global norm setter in this area. As Sweden, we seek a balanced perspective on digital sovereignty, emphasizing openness and the transatlantic link. increasing capabilities and the role and engagement and contribution of the European Union includes establishing strong partnerships in this field. Moving forward, we see a few key issues ahead. Cybercrime and ransomware are on the rise. We see states using cyber criminal groups to weaken adversaries and to circumvent sanctions. We see how new technologies, not least the exponential growth of artificial intelligence, is increasingly driving geopolitical competition. These tensions, of course, risk undermining the development of joint norms and standards. This, in turn, has severe consequences for developing countries trying to build capacity to use artificial intelligence to improve their societies. In this, the international development community has an important role to play in ensuring a human-centric, development-focused approach to new technologies. It is essential to reaffirm, as you just did, Andrea, that human rights apply online as well as offline. This principle has been confirmed on several occasions in Human Rights Council resolutions. And it is important to maintain the benefits of free and open internet in protecting this principle. It must not be weakened or diluted. Research also confirms that democracies deliver more and better quality development than non-democracies. And on your question of Global Gateway, major initiatives such as that, they firstly benefit from being implemented in democratic societies, but they're also in a position to support and strengthen democratic principles and processes. They can promote inclusion, they can promote transparency and respect for human rights. And this is particularly important in support of an open and free internet. Research tells us that democracies provide citizens with 300% higher penetration rate compared to non-democracies. I think particular focus should be put on closing the gender digital divide. Women and girls suffer disproportionately from the digital divide. The situation has further deteriorated during the pandemic. Based on the EU's gender equality policies, the EU is in a good position to promote and support women's and girls' access to a free and open internet in developing countries. In conclusion, digitalization holds tremendous potential, but we must continue to join forces in order to mitigate its risks and maximize benefit. Together, we must ensure that human rights apply online and that women and girls are safe, active, and empowered in the digital future. Thank you for this first round of comments. Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you very much, Ellen. This is a series of strong and very attractive statements. Later on, if I have time, I would like to continue a little bit the conversation on the EU as a global norm setter, because it's becoming something that is very often evoked in Brussels, the so-called Brussels effect, or the ability of the EU to design very let's say, complete and very attractive, if you wish, policy proposals and policy measures. At the same time, what we are experiencing here is potential problems in enforcement and compliance, even of very, very famous pieces of regulation such as the GDPR, right? And the new pieces of legislation that are being proposed by the EU potentially carry the same risk. And so I don't know if you have ideas about this or suggestions on how can we work on better enforcing legislation, not only in our own countries, but in developing countries where we bring our own proposal and initiatives through the Global Gateway. The second speaker I want to hear from should, to some extent, give us a reality check, right? Meaning, I will ask Emmanuel Gans whether he can tell us something about his experience and how open and secure he thinks the internet is today. Et donc, Emmanuel, je te donne la parole. Tu vas parler en français et il comprend très bien l'anglais. Et donc, si vous voulez poser des questions en anglais, il n'y a pas de problème, mais il préfère de parler, de donner son introduction en français. Floor is yours, Emmanuel.
Alors, merci beaucoup, Andrea, pour l'opportunité qu'il m'a été donnée aujourd'hui de m'exprimer devant un public aussi diversifié. Vous savez, lorsqu'on parle d'ouverture d'Internet, c'est un sujet que j'ai longuement mûri dans ma tête avant de venir devant ce public, de venir siéger dans ce panel. Je me dis qu'il serait vraiment difficile d'aborder la notion d'ouverture d'Internet alors qu'en réalité, dans mon pays, le Bénin, en Afrique, c'est très difficile en fait de pouvoir bénéficier des fruits qu'il est possible de tirer de l'ouverture d'Internet. Difficile parce qu'aujourd'hui, nous ne bénéficions pas encore des mêmes technologies en Afrique qu'en Europe ou en Occident ou ailleurs. Vous voyez, c'est souvent difficile de voir les créateurs de contenus digitaux devoir s'expatrier, quitter leur pays, venir s'installer en Europe avant de pouvoir voir leur travail être rémunéré. Cela pose déjà un problème d'inégalité. Alors que lorsque Madame parlait tout à l'heure, elle a évoqué l'importance d'assurer à tous le droit d'accès équitable à Internet. Et si aujourd'hui, nous sommes en train de parler d'ouverture à Internet, nous devons pouvoir prendre l'engagement d'œuvrer d'abord pour l'ouverture. Parce que quand nous parlons d'ouverture, cela suppose d'abord l'accès. Alors que l'accès est difficile de se connecter. Il y a même des zones dans certains pays qui ne sont vraiment pas connectées. Et le problème, justement, il y a déjà une faible existence de la connexion Internet, mais à cela s'ajoutent les défis liés aux censures, comme cela a été évoqué, et les coupures d'Internet. Plusieurs experts ont démontré qu'une seule coupure d'Internet d'une journée peut causer jusqu'à des milliards de pertes en économie. Mais malgré ça, les pouvoirs publics, parfois pour des raisons purement politiques, ou pour attenter à la liberté d'expression, pour faire taire toute voix dissidente sur leur mauvaise gouvernance, en viennent à censurer Internet, si bien qu'aujourd'hui, dans beaucoup de pays, je ne voudrais pas faire exception de mon pays, mais bon, je ne l'évoque pas, parler sur Internet est devenu très compliqué. Nous sommes tous dans une démarche d'autocensure, si bien qu'on a peur de s'exprimer parce qu'on se dit que cela peut nous envoyer en prison ou ailleurs. Et donc aujourd'hui, il est important de rappeler, de mon point de vue, qu'il faut travailler à l'accès à Internet, il faut travailler à l'ouverture d'Internet. Et quand nous avons fini de dire ça, il faut maintenant travailler à l'éducation, à la cybersécurité. Parce que aujourd'hui, je suppose, le public est connecté avec le Wi-Fi public EDD. Mais combien de personnes, avant de se connecter sur ce Wi-Fi-là, ont installé un pare-feu, par exemple, pour contrôler leurs données? Combien de personnes ont installé des antivirus? Combien de personnes ont installé des VPN pour ne pas laisser de traces à travers leur connexion ici? Donc, il y a beaucoup de choses que les gens ne savent pas. Et l'attitude qu'adoptent les pouvoirs publics, c'est beaucoup plus la censure, c'est beaucoup plus les sanctions. Et de mon point de vue, je pense que nous devons sanctionner moins et éduquer plus. Et c'est le message fondamental que je viens apporter dans ce panel. Ouvrons Internet, garantissons aux jeunes. L'Afrique représente dans la population mondiale connectée 10%. Cela vaut plus de 500 millions d'utilisateurs d'Internet. Et les Nations Unies affirment que l'Afrique a la population la plus jeune du monde, avec une moyenne d'âge de 19 ans, soit 2 fois moins jeune que les États-Unis et largement moins âgée que l'Europe. Donc, il y a une forte potentialité de croissance en Afrique. Les jeunes innovateurs existent et travailler aujourd'hui à ouvrir Internet ne serait que susciter l'engagement chez les jeunes pour valoriser leur potentiel, créer plus de solutions innovantes, rester sur leur continent africain pour travailler à développer le continent parce qu'on se plaint tout le temps que les jeunes Africains veulent s'expatrier, mais le défi est qu'il faut travailler à les maintenir sur le continent. Et cela passe par l'ouverture d'Internet, la sécurité d'Internet. Je suis Emmanuel Ganset et c'est un plaisir pour moi d'intervenir dans ce panel. Merci.
Merci bien, Emmanuel. Je voudrais écouter un peu plus tard sur ton expérience spécifique avec l'Internet et la liberté d'expression. But I will now see a very worrying message here on screen that the Zoom session has been restarted. So I'm not sure that we will be able to hear from Mohamed Bite and Lotte Knudsen in the coming few seconds, unless they are already available. But I don't see them on screen at the moment. So let me see. Okay, I'm seeing a very clear sign from the back of the room that we will not be able to hear them immediately. So as soon as they are ready, please give me a sign. So perhaps, Emmanuel, I will continue a little bit with you on one thing, and then I go to Helen, which is, after all, technology is not the problem, right? It's the use that is made of technology that is the problem. Meaning that technology in and of itself is not bad, is not necessarily carrying a malicious content, but it can be used to control people. It can be used to empower people at the same time. So in most cases, the difference between the regulatory frameworks that are more directed towards protecting human rights, to the extent that they can be adequately enforced, and those ones that are made for controlling people more, or that enable governments or the private sector to control people. I mean, the difference is in most cases in the rules, in the incentives, and in how the rules are deployed on the ground. First of all, si tu es d'accord, do you agree with me on this? And second, what do you think could be done, apart from the second part that you said, which is the computer hygiene and cybersecurity hygiene, which I leave apart for a second. What could be done in terms of rules to protect better freedom of expression in African countries? And I can assure you we have similar problems in Europe, but in the specific context of Africa, and also based on your specific experience, what do you think could be done? And what do you think the EU could do to promote more freedom of expression and less censorship, if you wish, in African countries where there is this type of problem?
Alors, c'est une question que je trouve très intéressante. Je pense pour ma part que aussi longtemps que nous allons vivre, les pouvoirs publics vont prendre les lois toujours pour vouloir contrôler Internet. Vous l'avez dit, moi je considère, et je l'ai dit lors d'une formation que je donnais au Bénin sur les avantages de l'accès à Internet, que c'est comme une boîte de Pandore. Une boîte de Pandore où tout le monde indexe en fait les inconvénients. Mais vous savez, au fond de la boîte de Pandore, il est resté ce qu'on a appelé l'espérance, qui pourra aider les gens à changer le monde. Et donc je pense que oui, Internet a ses inconvénients, mais Internet a aussi beaucoup d'avantages. Parce qu'aujourd'hui, nous ne vivons pas sans Internet. Je suis hors de mon pays. Pour rester en contact avec ma famille, j'ai besoin d'Internet pour pouvoir échanger. Et donc, la solution, c'est la veille citoyenne. Je pense que c'est parce que beaucoup de personnes ignorent leurs droits. Beaucoup de personnes ne savent pas, par exemple, qu'en allant sur un site, ils sont libres, par exemple, d'accepter qu'on collectionne leurs données, d'accepter les cookies, entre autres, ou de refuser. Beaucoup de personnes ne savent pas que lorsqu'ils militent pour une cause sensible, ils doivent prendre des précautions de sauvegarde pour pouvoir éviter de tomber sur certains pièges. Par exemple, vous allez dans les administrations publiques, vous vous connectez à Internet, il y a un risque de vulnérabilité là. Donc, ce que je voudrais dire pourra se résumer en ce qui suit. Le danger va toujours exister. Nous cohabitons, et même dans la vie réelle, nous cohabitons avec le danger. Vous sortez avec la nuit, vous risquez d'être poursuivi par un malfrat et d'être agressé. Il en est de même en ligne. Et cela passe par le contrôle des données que nous émettons en ligne. Pour que les gens puissent nous contrôler, pour que les gens puissent nous suivre, cela suppose que nous avons accès à Internet. Et parfois, nous allons sur des sites malveillants où nous acceptons, à des moments où nous ne savons pas, nous acceptons des choses qui finissent par nous nuire après. Si je vais en vacances à New York et je publie les photos on saura que je suis à New York. Et donc, par rapport à la menace des censures, je pense que les jeunes doivent d'abord s'éduquer à connaître leurs droits et les jeunes doivent faire de la veille citoyenne. Faire de la veille citoyenne pour pouvoir dénoncer les abus, pour pouvoir rester derrière les dirigeants, pour leur rappeler que l'accès à Internet est un droit fondamental et qu'on ne devrait pas les en priver parce qu'il y a organisation d'élections ou parce qu'un président souhaite couper court à la liberté d'expression dans son pays. Merci.
Merci, Emmanuel. I'm now turned to Helen. Perhaps, first of all, to go a little bit deeper on what Sweden is actually doing, right? I know that Sweden is actively involved in projects on the ground. And so when it comes to ICT, how do you deploy these projects? And if you have any example of recent projects that the Swedish government has been launching, and how, if you have those details, how the human right component, the open and secure internet component can be, is being blended with the infrastructure development component. I give you the floor and the mic, or you can use that one. Yeah.
Yes, you're right, Andrea, that we work with the digitalization agenda throughout our development cooperation efforts, both with the specific projects and then also with mainstreaming the digitalization throughout, also programs and projects in other areas. And I think this integrated approach is really necessary to be able to address this in a systematic fashion. We have a range of projects. I mentioned women and girls. We do a lot of concrete projects in this field, trying to help women and girls get a greater access and also make technology more women-friendly, because, of course, technology is not developed with a woman in focus, it's developed with a man in focus. So making technology more women-friendly, but also ensuring that women and girls get better access. That is, in addition to a technological question, also a question of human rights and democracy. We're also very active, Sweden, in the European context in establishing Team Europe initiatives, for example. We work with UN agencies, multilateral organizations, and a range of other partners, including civil society organizations, because this issue can only be dealt with in the holistic fashion that you yourself refer to, working with the security aspect of it, the democracy aspect, the development cooperation aspect. So we try to bring these different fields together in a systematic fashion on the national level and, of course, also within the European Union. I think what is also important, just to take another concrete example, is how we work with the digitalization and the climate agenda, making digitalization green, but also using digitalization to forward the work on climate in accordance with our Paris commitments. And that is something that both our aid agency, CEDA, but also at the political level, that we try to do a lot of concrete work on, because this double goal of greening the technology and getting the technology to contribute to the green development, I think, is really critical.
Thank you very much. And this obviously goes in the direction of what we call the twin transition at the EU level, that puts together the Green Deal objectives, if you wish, and the digital transition by also merging them in a way that is also requiring that technology be deployed in a sustainable way. So while I ask from the back of the room if they could signal whether okay, it seems that the speakers are not there. So this gives me the great opportunity to provoke Helen a little bit more, because obviously there's no debate that is a real debate if there's no attempt of the unskilled moderator to try to awkwardly create some embarrassment in some of the speakers. So I have to think about something for Emmanuel as well to sort of put him into trouble. But for Helen, it's easy, because you mentioned Team Europe. And we mentioned Global Gateway, right? The Global Gateway is a new attempt of the EU to go back into a space that, at least this is my perspective, is a space where the EU has not been very present over the past years, which is infrastructure, right? But at the same time, it is not something that is completely unrelated and it actually should be loaded with EU values, principles, and medium-term goals, which is far from easy. But since it's already complicated, to make it even more complex, it is something that falls at least partly, but I would say also mostly in the hands of players such as the European Investment Bank, who traditionally have had less ability to be present on the ground than some of the national development financial institutions. So how are we going to solve that puzzle? Meaning, can we really bring in a Team Europe approach with the EIB? I know that the EIB is creating hubs, regional hubs in Africa and Latin America and Asia. Is this something that you see problematic going forward? Is it going to take a while to learn how to work together in a multi-level governance and plus whoever other actors will need to be there, because the Global Gateway is fundamentally a public-private initiative where the public money is a subset, is a tiny subset of the private money that needs to be leveraged. And I give you a big responsibility. How do we square this circle? How do we solve this puzzle?
Well, firstly, just to confirm what you're saying, with the Global Gateway and the Team Europe initiative, of course, there are a lot of actors involved. I think it's absolutely indispensable that we move in that direction. I wouldn't qualify it as problematic, maybe to some extent challenging, because we have to learn to work with each other in partly new ways. But looking at the European financial infrastructure with the EIB, as you mentioned, I think we're very much joint in our goals and also in our intention to work closely together. It may take a little while, but I'm sure that we will be able to do that. Without such cooperation and joint team effort, it will be difficult to deliver. And that goes beyond the European architecture. The global challenges that we face must be dealt with in a Team Europe, setting, but also very closely in line with the UN organizations, with the multilateral actors, and again, as I said before, civil society organizations. So it requires also a team effort on the global level. But of course, we all need to develop our tools to make them more, what shall I say, in line with one another, to create the best possible synergies, to avoid overlaps. I'm sure we will be able to do that, and within the Global Gateway, there is a strong focus on infrastructure, but there is also a strong focus on the principles that need to go with that kind of investment to make them sustainable. And I'm confident that we're moving in that direction.
It's good. It's good that you are confident. I also, for what I can do, try to push, because I think this is a much needed initiative. And you could summarize like Team Europe needs team spirit, but also teamwork, also the ability to do teamwork, which is not only the spirit, but the instruments that can leverage the skills, the capabilities, the ability also to operate on the ground of the different players that need to be orchestrated in such an approach. So Emmanuel, je ne sais pas si tu vois l'éléphant dans la chambre, no? The elephant in the room, as people say in English. In this discussion, most people would say it's probably China, right? Because when you go in many, not only African, but many developing countries around the world and try to develop infrastructure, but also services, when it comes to digital services in particular, you don't find an empty space. You find the spaces largely has been already occupied by technologies that are developed by, in particular by China, which is a model that, yeah, you could criticize it or not. I take the responsibility for what I'm about to say. It is not the most respectful of fundamental rights in general, okay? And you could say, okay, Europe might have a counter-offer that is more protective of individual fundamental rights, including democratic values. But then you look at what is happening on the internet at the moment, and if you have the US model, is that really a model in which people are fully protected and democratic values are fully protected? I see in that model the prevalence of private governance and the predominance of large tech giants, which algorithmically compress very often or awkwardly try to promote, let's say, let me put it this way, awkwardly try to promote human rights. Do you feel this problem at the local level? Meaning, do you think that, for example, the presence of China in African countries can give governments the possibility to control the population more? Is there something that you think could be done about that? And if there is something, my impression is that that something is not the internet as we know it today, but it's perhaps the internet that the EU Digital Services Act tries to create, and perhaps a lot more than the DSA actually does. I don't want you to comment on the DSA, unless you want, of course, but I would like to know, to get your feeling from the ground, from the field, right? Whether you see this ongoing struggle between two models that we consider to be unsustainable, both the Chinese and the American, really making life hard for people to try to express themselves on the internet in their own countries.
Alors, merci beaucoup pour cette question. Le conflit entre les États-Unis et la Chine, nous y assistons à distance et nous voyons comment les effets rejaillissent sur nous de part et d'autre, parce que lorsque pour des conflits peut-être politiques, Facebook en vient à collecter les données derrière nous. Lorsque, par exemple, Facebook est utilisé pour contrefaire des élections ou pour susciter la haine contre des politiques, nous voyons cela et nous subissons cela. Et là où ça nous frappe le plus en réalité, c'est la guerre de désinformation à laquelle se livrent les États. Parce qu'il y ait un conflit entre les États-Unis et la Chine ou même la Russie, c'est une chose. Mais nous, jeunes, étant connectés, nous avons besoin d'avoir accès à la bonne information. Nous ne voulons peut-être juste nous connecter pour pouvoir travailler, échanger avec nos amis. Mais en lieu de ça, les réseaux sociaux et autres sont inondés de fake news, inondés de vidéos qui ne traduisent aucunement la réalité. Et donc, forcément, c'est un problème qui nous tombe dessus. Et pour moi, la solution à cela, c'est de couper la dépendance de l'Afrique des technologies ou des GAFA. Comme on a l'habitude de le dire, l'Afrique aujourd'hui a besoin de véritablement s'inventer d'abord, mais d'avoir sa propre technologie. Et tout à l'heure, vous m'avez demandé le rôle que l'Union européenne peut jouer pour aider l'Afrique à évoluer, pour aider l'Afrique à connaître un meilleur essor du point de vue technologique. Et je pense que aujourd'hui, l'Union européenne, à travers la Global Gateway, peut aider l'Afrique à développer des technologies pour être autonome. Nous aussi, on a envie de construire des réseaux sociaux qui sont exploités ou qui pourront profiter aux entrepreneurs béninois, aux entrepreneurs africains. Lorsque Facebook, Twitter et autres sont down, nous, on n'a pas envie d'être déconnectés, on n'a pas envie de subir ça. Mais pour cela, il faut que nous développions des modèles qui répondent à nos besoins. Et pour ça, nous n'avons pas forcément les moyens d'y arriver, mais c'est un besoin qui est là. Et si, à travers la Global Gateway, où l'Union européenne cherche à mieux connecter le monde, nous avons ce besoin-là aujourd'hui. Parlant de sécurité, c'est un besoin qui est là aujourd'hui. Et ce serait bien que l'Union européenne, qui d'ailleurs soutient beaucoup la société civile chez nous, puisse faire davantage d'efforts pour accompagner les jeunes Africains, n'est-ce pas, dans cette volonté d'autonomisation technologique. Et ce serait très bien pour nous.
Très bien, Emmanuel. I think this is a very interesting point, because what we are discovering increasingly everywhere around the world, not just in developing countries, but everywhere around the world, is that we will be able to really enter the digital age completely and in a sustainable and resilient way only if we create a digital public sphere, a digital public space where not only individuals, as you were saying before, are more literate from in terms of data, algorithms, cybersecurity, as you were saying. Civil society is empowered, the private sector is responsible, and governments have sharper tools to develop their policies and implement their policies. There's, and I gave a speech a few days ago at the Economic and Social Committee here in Brussels about this. There is no alternative. These are 4 pillars of the future digital society. 3 of them, however you select them, are not going to be enough. You can have very literate individuals, a very empowered civil society, and the private sector that is responsible, but governments can have the upper hand in many countries. You can have governments that are smart, but if the private sector is not held accountable, in most cases you will surrender to the algorithmic power that these players can deploy. So let me see, first of all, I'm going to stand up just to move things a bit, to put pressure on you. Oops. And see whether there's anybody who wants to ask a question from the audience. Anybody? Oh, there's one here. Let me see how many more. Please, guys, don't be shy. So I'm going to give you the floor here. Check if anybody else has changed their mind in the meanwhile. And then I'm going to take your question. I'm going to read a couple of other questions. One is actually directed to Ellen. You can already see this now. And then we move on with the final part of the debate. So please, can you introduce yourself so that people know who's asking the question? And if you have a question for one of our two speakers, please specify that. Sorry to regulate so much, but you know, this is the spirit of the panel.
No, that's fine. Thank you very much. Just checking everyone can hear me.
I can't
It's working.
hear
Wonderful. So my name is Leander Barrington-Leach. I actually post a question online, which you can therefore ignore. So I work for the Five Rights Foundation. We work on children's rights in the digital environment. Thank you very much for your very interesting interventions. We completely agree that human rights need to apply online as they do offline. Completely agree also that there's a particular gender dimension that needs to be taken into account. Agree that there is a need for education in this space, and agree with many of the things that were said about that one thing is not enough and that you need the rest. As I made in the point online, I don't think tech is not neutral. You talked, Andrea, about algorithmic pushing you one way or the other. It's certainly the case that that tech indeed is not neutral. I would say that education is not the silver bullet. That although it is very important, you cannot put the responsibility on users, and in particular if we're talking about vulnerable people like children or their parents or their teachers, to navigate this environment which is not safe by design. We believe very strongly that the digital environment needs to respect, as you said, the same rules as the offline environment, which means basic concepts indeed also of product safety. So I would like to ask you how you see this fitting in. The EU has clear commitments in this area in terms of its norms, also in terms of child online safety, which are part of the digital principles. We have developed a toolkit on child online safety, which is also supported by the EU and the European Commission. I would like to know from you how you see these things in practice being used to develop strong policies for safety online, in particular for children. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And your question is for both panelists, I take? Okay. Can I ask you to keep the question in mind for when I get back to you, because I see that our dear friend Mamadou is now featured on screen, which is fantastic, and it's good that we managed to have your contribution, Mamadou Bité, as I said, Executive Secretary of the African Capacity Building Foundation. So Mamadou, can you first of all tell us a little bit what the African Capacity Building Foundation does? We've been talking quite a lot, and you heard at least parts of the debate, and certainly the last question asking for how do we do these things in practice and how do we build capacity, knowing that simply empowering individuals or making individuals more literate might be an essential condition, but by no means a condition that can really solve things, like a problem solver by itself. So I give you the floor for your statement, knowing that you have 4 minutes, and thanks for being with us.
Thank you very much. I am very pleased to finally get in, because I believe that this is a very important topic and conversation, because we have seen how digital progress has been skyrocketing. During the first year of COVID in 2020, we have seen 3 years worth of digital digitization progress happened in just 1 year. If we look at the report by the World Economic Forum of last year, which is predicting that 70% of wealth that will be created in the next 10 years is going to be through digital platforms, this makes the conversation extremely, extremely important. And as you know, the issue is not just about training. It's a little bit more complex. When we talk about digitization, in my view, we need to look at infrastructure and we need to look at enablement. Infrastructure, if I look at Africa, where we have the mandate of capacity building of institutions, individuals, state actors, non-state actors, to deliver on development, we see that the infrastructure is very poor. That would enable digitization. Just to share a few, according to the African Development Bank report last year, only 30% access to electricity on the continent. According to Statista, 2022, only 36% have internet connectivity. And only 40% of youth aged between 15 and 17 are in school. And that's according to UNESCO by 2020. And of them, only 5% of skills, digital skills, are relevant to the modern jobs coming up. So if it is only 50% of skills that are relevant to digitize, so that raises, I agree with you, capacity building is not the panacea. It is important, but not sufficient, but it is very important actually to build those skills. And that's really the enablement part. The knowledge, the capacity, the affordability, all of that is part of the enablement aspect. And you asked me the question, what is the African Capacity Building Foundation doing? ACBF is the premier capacity building partner on the continent. It belongs to 40 African states, supported by their partners, such as World Bank, UNDP, and some bilaterals, to support capacity development at all levels, from individuals to state, to deliver development. We do that in different ways, through research, training on planning, but also capacity building of issue-based capacity building, which actually speaks to an ecosystem of stakeholders. I will take just one example. The work we are doing on climate change right now is really looking at how do you capacitate the Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Health, all the government entities that actually are involved directly or indirectly, look at Parliament in terms of legislations, NGOs in terms of the advocacy, and also supporting capacity of think tanks and research institutes, but also practically building the capacity of development actors in terms of really identifying, designing, developing, and implementing concrete programs that bring about change. So that's what also we look at really as a role that we can play in the digitization to ensure that no one is left behind. Because we all see the extreme rapidity with which the global economy is digitizing, and this impacts trade, the way people trade, and data shows us that during COVID, those businesses that were digitized actually did withstand the crisis. Many of them actually did even thrive, but those who did not have the digital capabilities or digital connectivity actually are the ones that were hardest hit. So this brings again really the importance of digitization. And for us, we really welcome actually the 150 billion investment package under the EU-Africa Global Gateway Initiative, which can have really profound strategic and tactical benefits to the continent. As you know, the World Bank says that a 10% increase in broadband internet penetration can generate 1.4% increase in GDP growth in the emerging markets. So really, this can help us support the African AFCFTA, the African Continental Free Trade Area implementation, but also the achievement of the agenda, the goals of the Agenda 2063. Let me pause there.
Thank you very much, Mamadou. I want to perhaps ask a follow-up question to you, and then I'll go back to our other panelists who've been here for the full session. You probably don't know that, or some people in the audience probably know that I've been doing quite a lot of work on artificial intelligence and more generally on digital transformation. And I've been a bit shocked by the economic projections of the big benefits that artificial intelligence can bring at the global level. We're talking about, you know, consultancy firms normally have this game that they play. They throw numbers, they crunch numbers and models, and they tell us that there is a dividend of potentially between 15 and 16 trillion dollars between now and 2030 to be gained by artificial intelligence. Then you start digging into this figure, and you find that of this huge amount hides an increase in GDP of 26% for China, of some 20% from the US, or some 12% for the EU, and only in 10 years, 5% for Africa and Latin America. So if you take these numbers at face value, which you shouldn't, but I mean, as a general tendency, what I see is that this big technological transformation is likely to exacerbate the polarization of the economy and the distance between the global north and the global south, as opposed to giving opportunity and empowering the global south. I don't know if you see this danger, and if you share this view, what do you think should be done in order to avoid that this happens?
Well, actually, this is why I think that the issue is not just digitization, but it is actually inclusive and equitable digitization. Those two qualifiers are extremely, extremely important to bring along those geographies that we just mentioned, such as Africa, Latin America, and emerging markets. The picture I have just painted in terms of the insufficient level of infrastructure, but also the very poor and low skills actually would sustain that prediction that you have just talked about, also intelligence. And I can say that right now, even if we see more startups now emerging from unusual places in Africa, for instance, in Kenya and other places, Nigeria, etc., that is what we would call the tree that hides the forest, actually. Underneath that, you have a vast insufficiency in infrastructure, but very low skills. Most students in universities don't go into engineering or technical sciences, but they are going into literature and all of those kind of things. So although it is important and necessary in a society, but actually really to be able to reap the benefits of digitization and the growth of artificial intelligence, I think that we need to have the expertise, but we need to have the infrastructure, but having that without real access for everyone actually can lead to the type of outcomes that you have said. So this is why working in public-private partnership to bring and stimulate the private sector to massively invest in infrastructure, bringing also new technologies such as digital ID, and also facilitating broad access to broadband at affordable levels, and putting training and capacity building materials that are accessible to all. including pictorials and very simple voiceover and the likes, understanding that not everybody has been to school, can read or write, but people can listen and understand. People can see images and follow. So in a multi-form, in an inclusive way, I think that can help. But definitely, I will insist again, huge importance in infrastructure, but even more efforts in building the skills and abilities to use that infrastructure.
Thank you very much, Mamadou. And your words trigger a reflection also on our end, meaning that, in my opinion, one of the problems, well, part of these problems that we are exploring together are problems that could be solved also through responsible initiatives in the global north. I'll give you one example. If we imagine that part of this polarization effect of the economy also comes from diversification or reshoring of production from global supply chains, which is something that is ongoing in many respects, and it could be triggered also by the digital transformation. Well, the extent to which the developing countries will be able to participate in global value chains will also depend on whether we, for example, in Europe, approach the digital transformation from a people-centric perspective or not. Give you one example. I was a few years ago appointed as a member of the high-level expert group of the European Commission on artificial intelligence, right? And I was asked to advise the European Commission on how to become more competitive in artificial intelligence. And I was a bit puzzled by that mandate, because for me, if I ask myself, how can the EU become more competitive in AI, perhaps I will fill factories with robots, right? But if I ask myself, how can AI help the EU achieve Sustainable Development Goal number 8, that incorporates full and decent employment for everybody, the answer and the policy priorities that I come with are very different. So having a people-centric approach and an inclusive approach to technology, as Mamadou was saying, is something that can benefit the Global South also if implemented in the Global North, meaning that we are only moving technology up when this is compatible with human flourishing and development. So I won't turn in the last 5 minutes, as we will not have the contribution of the other two speakers, to our two panelists here, unless someone has a final comment. And let me just quickly check the room if I see hands up. There is one. So since it's 4 minutes and 38 seconds missing, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself, but be very concise in asking your questions. Let me see if anybody wants to intervene. Then I give 1 minute each to both of you to reflect on what you've heard.
Thanks a lot for your contribution. My name is Josef Knöppler. I'm from Germany, and I'm a G7 youth delegate for economic transformation, and we also cover digital aspects. I have my question is twofold. First to Madame Edwards. We see the DSA introduced, or not yet introduced, by European Union to tackle disinformation, or to tackle, in general, some issues on the internet. Especially we as young people face mental health problems due to hate speech on social networks and on social media. But we also asking ourselves if this could be also a threat to free speech in the internet. And so my question to you is, do you think that could be a potential threat, that we go too far with the DSA to don't have the balance between free speech and this regulation
and the control of hate speech, for example, or illegal content online? Yeah, that's pretty clear. I will turn now to Emmanuel. You can react freestyle to everything you've heard. What do you bring home from this conversation? And I'm going to give you 1 minute. You can check also the time, helping keep the time as we wrap up.
Merci beaucoup. Encore une fois, je pense que c'est une très belle opportunité qui m'a été offerte. En descendant de ce panel ce soir, je repars en fait conscient que les gens ici présents, que Madame Edouard qui est dans le panel et tous les autres qui nous entendent sont conscients des défis que représente d'abord l'accès à Internet, l'importance de l'ouverture à Internet. Et comme l'ami dans le public vient de le dire, il est important de veiller à lutter contre tout ce qui est discours haineux. Parce que c'est cela qui va nous permettre à nous de pouvoir exploiter l'espace en ligne de façon à préserver notre vie, à préserver notre mental. Et je crois qu'il y a une question qui a été posée aussi dans le public par rapport à la protection des enfants en ligne. Je pense, pour ma part, et pour le contexte que je maîtrise, qui est celui africain, que nous devons revenir à l'enseignement des valeurs fondamentales, à savoir le civisme. Quand j'étais enfant, le cours informatique que j'ai fait consistait juste à allumer un ordinateur, à taper une phrase dans Word, et puis voilà, je me considérais champion. Mais aujourd'hui, ça ne doit plus être le cas. On doit pouvoir éduquer les enfants à savoir qu'il y a des sites sur lesquels on ne part pas, et aussi à mettre en place des mécanismes sérieux, mettre si possible des garde-fous pour les sociétés de réseaux sociaux s'il le faut, pour qu'ils assurent une protection réelle pour les internautes, pour les jeunes. Et cela, je pense que l'Union européenne a le pouvoir de le faire. Merci.
Thank you, Manuel. I turn to Helen for your final reactions, and then we wrap up. Yeah.
Thank you, Andrea. I'm looking at the clock. It's ticking, but briefly, let me just pick up on a few points. Firstly, thank you for raising again the perspective of the children and for bringing to our attention the particular toolbox that you have elaborated. I think this is really an important perspective. I mentioned women and girls, and there are a lot of reasons to highlight in particular the situation for children. During the pandemic, they were particularly vulnerable, children with disabilities, for example, children in conflict situations, and equally when it comes to digitalization, a child perspective must be integrated. So thank you for bringing that to our attention. When it comes to the people-centered development, that was a question. I think you answered to that already very well. Digitalization in itself is not either a contribution to equality or working against equality. It's the way that we use digitalization that actually defines whether it helps sustainable development or not. Taking the aim is, I think, really people-centered approach, meaning we use digitalization to promote sustainable development for the people, leaving no one behind. I think that is the really important point here. And then on the final questions, when it comes to finding the right balance between free speech and protection, I think our approach is that whatever is illegal or not allowed offline should not be allowed online. And of course, there are a lot of reasons to be protective, not least when it comes to, for example, women and children who are very much exposed online. But there are laws regulating what is allowed when it comes, for example, to hate speech offline. And those laws should also be implemented when it comes to similar hate speech, for example, online. But thank you very much, Andrea, for this debate, for this panel, and for keeping it together so well. Thank you.
No problem. So much for an Italian moderator. You know, you get 3 speakers out of 5 and you still are late. So what I want to do, quickly wrap up, and then I'll call our thematic moderator on stage. I bring home several things. I think Global Gateway has important responsibilities. First of all, connect everybody. Second, keep these different pillars of civil society, individuals, and governments and private sector together when developing. And keeping also the open-ended nature of our legislation. We will be trialing and experimenting with our legislation here to find the right balance, because it's very difficult to get on the DSA in particular on day one. And this has to be reflected also in finding the right balance everywhere around the world. We have to do this together, individuals, civil society, private sector, governments. As people say, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. I think we want to go far with the Global Gateway, right? And we want to go far in cooperating with African countries and other countries around the world. So this brings this panel to an end. I invite Jeffrey Spink, our thematic moderator, to join us, and then it will be a wrap-up for everybody. Thank you.
Well, a huge thank you to Andrea and the panel for filling an hour, even with people missing. I think we could have easily let the session run on for another hour, and it would have been just as fascinating. I made so many notes; it's very difficult to summarize from my own perspective. I love the metaphor of Central Park after dark. That really, really works for me. I caught on to the fact that cybercrime and ransomware and stuff holds countries and people back. And I love the idea that infrastructure and digitalization has to be equitable, and it has to be delivered in a way that is fair to everybody. And I think also, as a parent and now as a grandparent myself, I worry about children online. I really do, and I think they are exposed to an awful lot of things that we were never exposed to when I was growing up. It's a major concern. And the other thing I take away is this whole difference between the US approach, the EU approach, and the Chinese approach. In other words, one is very statist, one is very commercial, and the other one is very social and wants to look after people. And I'll leave you to work out which one is which. That's it from this session. The next, I'm having to scroll through so many notes here. The next session will be in here at 17:35. So that's just in 25 minutes. And it's about connection struggles and staying connected. So taking forward this theme of stability and security online. Thank you very much indeed to everybody.